The gavel came down like thunder, a sound that shattered Janelle Carter's world into jagged, unrecognizable pieces. Ahow! The courtroom erupted. Some gasped, others murmured, and a scream sliced through it all. Janelle's knees buckled as her hands reached out to nothing, her scream primal, guttural, echoing off oak walls. Bailiffs surged forward, trying to hold her back as she collapsed, sobbing, at the foot of the judge's bench. Her son, Michael, only 17, stood still as a statue. He didn't flinch, didn't cry. His face was pale, emotionless, drained of all youth. Cameras flashed, capturing the ruin of a family in an instant. As the cuffs clicked around his wrists and the deputy led him away, Michael turned slightly. No tears, no anger, just lips that moved once, whispered words that no one but the nearest guard heard. Michael said this wasn't justice, this was revenge. In the silence after the courtroom emptied, Janelle sat alone on the bench where her son had stood. The reporters were gone. The judge had left without a word. Only the faint hum of the ventilation remained, and the echo of the verdict hung like a ghost. Her hands trembled as she traced the wood grain of the bench, as if trying to memorize it. She had worn her best dress that morning, the one Michael said made her look strong. Now it clung to her like defeat. She didn't cry anymore. Not here. Her grief had calcified into something heavier. As the janitor swept the gallery, she whispered to herself, he didn't deserve this, none of this was real, they never even saw him. The world outside was still moving, but inside this chamber time had stopped. Justice had not just failed. It had never even shown up. Before all this, Michael Carter was invisible in the best way. No trouble, no noise. Teachers praised him. Neighbors smiled. He carried books in one hand, groceries in the other. He was the kind of boy people called good, but rarely remembered. His room was neat. His shoes polished. His life simple. The night before the verdict, he had written his mother a note, folded, tucked beneath her pillow. It said, I'm sorry I wasn't louder. I should've screamed the truth. But I didn't want to make things worse. Now, I see silence is just another lie. Love you always. Mom. Janelle read it again that night. She would read it 1,000 more. In his words, she saw the weight he carried. A child taught to survive, not to speak. Taught to obey, not resist. That silence, his and theirs, had stolen everything. The diner where Michael worked hadn't changed. Same flickering neon sign, same cracked red booths. Janelle sat at the counter 1 week later, staring at the coffee he used to pour for her. The waitress, eyes full of pity, didn't speak. Behind the counter, Michael's name tag still hung beside the staff photos, his smile beaming from a different world. She reached out and touched it gently. He had plans. Community college. An internship. He'd saved every dollar. Now his face hung like a relic. Customers came and went, unaware of the weight behind the counter. Janelle didn't move for hours. The world continued spinning, uncaring. Her son was gone. And this place, like everyone else, had moved on too easily. At church that Sunday, no one met Janelle's eyes. The prayers felt hollow. The hymns cold, wand. The same people who once clapped when Michael recited scripture now whispered behind hands. She sat alone in the third pew, hands clenched in her lap, listening to the pastor speak of grace. But what grace had touched her house? Her son sat in a cage. Her prayers unanswered. She rose halfway through the sermon and walked out. No one stopped her. No one called after her. Outside, the sky hung gray and heavy. She looked up and whispered, I see now God doesn't come to court. He stays safe in pews. Janelle began with the house. The party had been held just 2 blocks from the school, kids laughing, music too loud, and one boy left dead by morning. The police chalked it up to a fight gone wrong. But Janelle had questions no one wanted to answer. She walked through the house days later, abandoned now, stained red cups on the floor, cigarette burns on the couch, silence hanging like smoke. She imagined Michael standing in that room, scared, confused. The official story didn't match her son's nature. She talked to the neighbors, who said they heard yelling. No one had asked them before. Not the police. Not the lawyers. Just Janelle. She wrote everything down. Dates. Voices. Inconsistencies. This wasn't grief anymore. It was purpose. And for the first time in weeks, she felt awake. At first, everyone told her to stop. Her sister. The pastor. Even the lawyer who had represented Michael. They spoke softly, as if calming a dangerous current. You have to let it go, they said. You'll make it worse. But she saw it in their eyes. Fear, resignation. It wasn't that they didn't believe her. They did. They just didn't believe the truth mattered. Janelle stopped attending church. Stopped answering phone calls. She buried herself in records and transcripts. Late nights at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers and silence. Her hands trembled not from exhaustion, but focus. She was done waiting for the system. They had stolen her son. Now she would steal back the truth. She found Elena by accident. A quiet girl with haunted eyes and a voice that never rose above a whisper. They met outside the school, both watching the building as if mourning something. You knew Michael, Janelle said. The girl nodded. He didn't do it, she replied. Her voice cracked. He saw who did. Elena looked over her shoulder constantly. Said strange things like they told me not to talk, and I heard him scream before the lights went out. Janelle asked her to testify. The girl hesitated, then agreed. But 2 days later, Elena was gone. Her house emptied. No forwarding address. No phone left behind. Just a note scrawled in panic. I'm sorry. I can't. Janelle held the paper for hours. She didn't cry. She knew now. Someone was hiding more than a mistake. They were hiding the truth itself. Janelle turned to the media. A desperate gamble. She stood outside local news stations with flyers, evidence packets, anything to catch attention. Most never looked her way. One young reporter took a folder. Promised to call. Never did. At home, she recorded a video. Just her voice and Michael's photo. She posted it online. Shared it everywhere. The views climbed slowly, then plateaued. Nothing changed. The silence around her son remained intact, like concrete walls. Janelle screamed into a system built not to listen. And yet, she kept screaming. Because silence had once betrayed her family. She wouldn't let it happen again. Michael's letters came slower now. They were shorter. Tighter. No more drawings in the margins. No more jokes. He spoke of things no teenager should know. Guards who looked the other way. Nights without sleep. Screams echoing from solitary. It's always quiet until it isn't, he wrote. Sometimes, I forget my name. One letter ended with a single line, I'm still here, Mom. But not for long. Janelle stared at those words for hours. She read them until the page blurred. Then she copied them into her notebook, between witness names and timeline sketches. Her son was disappearing, piece by piece. If she didn't find the truth soon, there wouldn't be anything left of him to save. Janelle returned to the party house at night. Something pulled her back. Unfinished business, unanswered questions. The street was silent. The air thick with memory. She moved through the yard with a flashlight, her breath fogging in the cold. In the corner, buried behind a trash bin, she found it, a security camera. Old. Cracked. But still mounted. Facing the front street. Her heart pounded. Why hadn't anyone mentioned this? The police report made no reference. She snapped photos, traced the wiring, followed it toward the house next door. No one answered. But a small sticker on the side said property of Stoneway Electrical. A private contractor. She had a new lead. And for the first time since Michael's arrest, her fear shifted. No longer of what she didn't know, but of what she might soon uncover. Stoneway Electrical sat behind a locked gate in a worn-down industrial park. Janelle waited outside for hours. When an older technician exited the building with a clipboard, she approached cautiously. "I'm looking for footage from a house you serviced," she said. The man narrowed his eyes. "We don't keep old files." Janelle handed him the address. His gaze flickered. "I remember that job. Months before the Carter trial." She leaned in. "Was the footage saved?" He didn't answer. Just walked back inside. But 2 days later, a package arrived at her door. No return label. Inside, a USB drive and a note in sharp handwriting. "You're right. The tape exists." Her hands shook. She plugged it in. The footage was grainy, but what it showed made her stop breathing. Michael wasn't the one in the fight. He stood back. Someone else threw the punch. She watched the video over and over. The image wasn't clear, but the silhouette was familiar. Broad shoulders, curly blonde hair. Janelle recognized him. Tyler Graff. The Diaz nephew. He had testified. Claimed he'd only arrived after the fight. But here he was, in the middle of it. His voice echoed on the audio. "Get off him!" Followed by a punch. The boy who died fell back, unmoving. The frame shook. Michael ran forward, not as attacker, but witness. Her breath caught in her throat. Tyler's family had power, connections, political armor. But they'd lied. And worse, they'd erased her son to protect their own. Janelle felt her grief turn into something sharper. Not rage. Purpose. She didn't just want Michael free. She wanted them exposed. Tyler Graff had vanished months after the trial. No college enrollment. No employment history. A sealed juvenile record. Janelle searched for weeks. Old classmates. Family addresses. Online aliases. Then she found it, an apartment under a different name in a small town upstate. She drove 4 hours without stopping. Parked across the street, and waited. He emerged around dusk. Same walk. Same nervous glances. He wasn't hiding because of guilt. He was hiding because someone had helped him disappear. She didn't confront him. Not yet. Instead, she took photos. Car plates. Video of him unlocking his door. She had proof now, not just of a crime, but of a cover-up. They hadn't just buried evidence. They'd buried a boy, and called it justice. She brought the footage and photos to Michael's old public defender. He scanned the files, face growing pale. "I never saw this," he muttered. "None of this was in discovery." Janelle stared him down. "Then who buried it?" He didn't answer. But his silence said enough. A week later, she received an email from a blocked address. One line, they knew. They all knew. Attached, court memos, redacted statements, a list of sealed evidence. The chain led back to the Diaz office. Someone inside had covered for Tyler. Suppressed the footage. Controlled the narrative. Janelle printed every file. Labeled every line. She pinned them to her kitchen wall like a war map. Potty. The truth wasn't hidden. It had been hand-delivered into silence. But now she had a voice. And it was growing louder. Janelle entered the courthouse again, not as a broken mother, but as a woman armed with evidence. She walked past the same bench where she once collapsed. Her hands didn't shake this time. She requested a meeting with the judge who oversaw Michael's case. "I have new evidence," she said. The clerk looked bored. "Submit it to appeals." But Janelle didn't leave. She waited. Sat in the hallway for hours. When the judge finally passed, she stood and said clearly, "You sentenced a child to life. You owe him 5 minutes." He paused. Just for a second. Then walked on. Doors closed behind him like steel. Janelle stared at them. She knew the truth now. This wasn't about mistakes. It was about power. And they would not give it back willingly. She turned next to the district attorney. The same man who'd built his career on Michael's conviction. She walked into his press conference with a copy of the footage in hand. "Play this," she said, stepping in front of the podium. Reporters stared. The Da's smile cracked. "Security," he snapped. But the cameras were rolling. Janelle held the USB high. "This tape was never submitted. Your office knew who threw the punch." He didn't deny it. He didn't even look at her. He simply turned and walked away, suit stiff, face blank. The moment hit social media within minutes. Janelle was no longer invisible. But visibility didn't mean safety. That night, her windows were smashed. Her tires slashed. Still, she didn't flinch. They had taken everything. There was nothing left to lose. She went to the media again, this time with momentum. Independent journalists, civil rights groups, legal podcasters, all of them hungry for truth. She didn't beg. She showed them proof. The footage. The redacted memos. A timeline of silence. One reporter published the first story. Then another. Then 5 more. It spread. A storm. Talk shows. Headlines. Hashtags. Michael Carter's name trended for the first time. Not as a convict. As a wronged child. Janelle watched from her living room as the anchor read her son's story aloud. It was surreal. Vindication, but not relief. "We were never quiet," she whispered. "You just weren't listening." She lit a candle beneath Michael's photo and prayed, not for justice, for endurance. The courtroom doors opened again, this time for review. The judge had changed. The tone had shifted. But the fight was far from over. The Diaz office denied wrongdoing. Called it a miscommunication. Janelle sat through every motion, every objection. She watched them try to bury the truth again, this time in paperwork. But she was ready. She had witnesses now. Journalists in the gallery. Lawyers who believed her. And one man inside the Diaz office, anonymous, silent, had begun sending documents. Internal emails. Meeting transcripts. Private memos. One file was titled, "Close the case. Silence the noise." Janelle smiled bitterly when she read it. The noise had become a roar, and she was its engine. Michael entered the courtroom again, hands no longer in cuffs, but his face, older, worn, showed the years lost. Janelle stood when he did. He scanned the room, saw the cameras, the reporters, the judge. The man who once sent him away sat across the aisle. Michael walked slowly to the stand. When asked if he wanted to speak, he said, yes. His voice didn't shake. "You stole everything from me," he said, eyes locked on the Da. "And you sleep just fine." The room went still. No gasps. Just silence. The kind that comes when truth slices deep. The Da didn't look up. The judge did. For the first time, someone with power listened. And for once Michael was heard. The courtroom filled fast. Not just lawyers and reporters, activists, students, strangers holding signs with Michael's name. Janelle sat in the front row, spine straight, face unreadable. The new legal team presented everything. The footage, the sealed memos, the disappearance of Elena, the anonymous whistleblower. The judge watched, silent, as the Diaz office squirmed. Their responses grew thinner, their arguments vague. "We had no knowledge of that tape," the prosecutor said. But Janelle stood. "Your office submitted Exhibit 14. It came from the same address." The room murmured. The lie cracked. And the system, built on silence, began to fracture. Michael sat beside his mother, no chains on his wrists. For the first time, they felt like a family again. Not victims. Witnesses. The defense called their final witness, Elena's older sister. She took the stand in silence, hands trembling. "She told me she saw who did it," she said. She was scared. Then she vanished. The Da objected. The judge allowed it. Her voice cracked. They came to the house before she left. Men in suits. Said it was official business. The gallery leaned forward. The defense handed over security cam stills from that day. Government IDs, blurred faces. "Do you recognize these men?" "No," she whispered. But she did. She said one was from the prosecutor's office. A beat of silence followed. Janelle's heart pounded. The judge scribbled a note. Something shifted. Like pressure cracking. The truth wasn't just leaking now. It was flooding. The leak came that evening. Hundreds of documents, email threads, audio notes, surveillance logs, released anonymously to the press. Headlines exploded overnight. Prosecutor withheld evidence in teen conviction. Major news networks circled in. The governor's office released a statement. The DA, silent. His office locked. The next morning, protesters gathered outside the courthouse. Not just for Michael, but for every name that never made the news. Janelle stood among them, holding her son's old-school portrait. It was no longer about one case. It was about every courtroom that treated boys like Michael as guilty the moment they entered. Janelle didn't speak to reporters. She didn't need to. Her silence now held more weight than 1,000 interviews. It said, "You see us now." The judge called an emergency hearing. It lasted less than 20 minutes. The new evidence, the suppressed tape, the disappearance of a key witness, together they tore apart the original conviction. "This court," the judge said, "recognizes a miscarriage of justice." He ordered Michael's immediate release, pending full exoneration. The courtroom erupted. Some clapped. Some cried. But Michael stood motionless. He looked to his mother. She nodded. He closed his eyes. Breathed in. 7 years. Gone. But in that breath he began to reclaim himself. As the bailiff unlatched the door, Michael stepped forward alone. No cuffs. No chains. Just a boy becoming a man under the weight of every eye in the room. Outside, the flashbulbs exploded. Reporters shouted questions. Michael didn't answer. Janelle followed close, hand at his back. They walked past the microphones. Past the cameras. Past the people who never spoke when it mattered. At the end of the courthouse steps, Michael paused. Looked up at the gray sky. Then knelt. Quietly. Slowly. Janelle stepped beside him. It wasn't a grand moment. It was grief and freedom tangled together. He whispered, "I'm sorry I didn't speak sooner. I thought silence was safer." She said nothing. Just took his hand. Their fingers locked. For the first time since he was 17, he stood without fear. Not because the world had changed, but because he had. And now, it was the world's turn to answer. Michael didn't celebrate. There were no parties. No speeches. Just a quiet ride home. The apartment hadn't changed, but he had. He walked through each room like it was a memory he didn't recognize. His bed felt too soft. The silence too loud. Janelle cooked his favorite meal, but he barely touched it. He stared at the walls, then at the door, as if waiting for someone to storm in and take it all back. She didn't push. She knew trauma clings like fog. That night, she found him sitting on the fire escape, hood pulled up, eyes blank. "It still feels like I'm in there," he whispered. Janelle sat beside him and said softly, "Then we wait, together. Not for the past to return, but for the future to begin." He tried to sleep, but sleep wouldn't come. Dreams came instead. Of locked doors. Screams through vents. Cold floors. He sat up in the dark, breath sharp, sheets soaked. Janelle heard him through the thin wall. Didn't speak. Just stood outside his door. A silent presence. Morning came slow. Michael stood in front of the mirror. Touched his face like it belonged to someone else. 7 years had carved into him, lines around his eyes, stiffness in his movements. He stepped into the hallway like a guest in his own life. Mail piled on the table. A stack of his letters sat unopened, things Janelle had sent even when he stopped replying. She placed them in his hands. "These are still yours," she said. Michael nodded, but his hands shook as he held them. They visited his best friend's grave 2 days later. Michael hadn't been back since the funeral. He wasn't allowed to attend. The headstone was simple, clean, new. Fresh flowers rested at its base. Michael stood for a long time, eyes unfocused. "I didn't fight hard enough," he whispered. "I saw what happened, and I froze." Janelle placed a hand on his shoulder. "You were 17. You were a child." But Michael didn't answer. He knelt slowly, fingers brushing the cold stone. "I thought silence would protect me. It didn't." Janelle crouched beside him. "It never does," she said. For a long time they stayed like that. 2 survivors. One gone. One returned. Bound by a single truth. Silence is not safety. It's a sentence of its own. Michael's name was cleared officially. The charges vacated. All. A public statement issued. A quiet apology from the same Da who once refused to meet his eyes. But the apology was made to cameras, not to Michael. Not to Janelle. "We regret the error," they said. Not, "We're sorry." Just regret, sanitized and rehearsed. Reporters asked Michael how he felt. He looked past them. "How do you feel when they give you back something they already burned?" Janelle didn't attend the press conference. She stayed home, packing the documents. She didn't need to hear their words. She had her son back. And though he wasn't whole, he was home. The system gave back the body, but they had buried the boy. That night, Janelle placed all the files into a sealed box: court transcripts, letters, photos, timelines. She labeled it simply, "The Fight." She slid it under her bed. Not to forget, but to rest. For the first time, she allowed herself to exhale without guilt. In Michael's room, she left a journal on the nightstand. A new one. Blank. On the cover she wrote, "Write it. All of it." He didn't say much when he saw it. Just nodded. Then placed his hand over the first page like it was sacred. The next morning he was already writing. Slow. Careful. As if each word rebuilt part of him. Janelle stood in the doorway, eyes full but voice steady. This wasn't justice. But it was a beginning. And beginnings, however quiet, are sacred too. Michael stood in front of the courthouse, the same one where his life had been stolen. The steps were cleaner now. New flag. New security. Same stone. Wow. He stared at the entrance, hands in his pockets. The sun was rising behind the columns, but his expression held no warmth. He wasn't angry. He wasn't triumphant. Just older. Tired in a way that didn't show in the mirror. Janelle stood nearby, watching from a distance, letting him have the moment. He closed his eyes, took a breath, and let the silence settle. This wasn't closure. Closure was a myth. But it was still a return. A full circle. And full circles aren't endings. They're foundations. He whispered, "They didn't break me, just buried me." And now, he was unearthing himself, piece by piece. Inside, a new trial had begun. Another young boy. 17. Same skin. Same walk. Different name. Michael watched from the back pew. The boy's mother sat where Janelle once had, back straight, hands clenched. The courtroom hadn't changed. Neither had the looks from the jury. Michael studied the prosecutor's expression. Smooth. Confident. Dangerous. He looked down at the boy's trembling shoulders. No one saw the past repeating, but he did. It was a mirror. He leaned forward. Took notes. Not for evidence. For him. For her. For anyone else who might walk that path. It was too late for who he'd been. But not too late to stop another version of him from being buried the same way. He started volunteering. community centers, youth clinics, groups for wrongfully convicted. He never told his full story, just fragments. But people listened. Boys looked him in the eye when he spoke. Mothers gripped his hand when he said, "I believe you." He didn't wear suits, didn't speak with polish, but his voice cut through because it was lived. The pain hadn't faded, but it had purpose. And that purpose became a rhythm. Days filled with faces, with stories, with fire. The world hadn't changed. The system still cracked beneath weight it refused to carry. But now Michael stood inside it, not as a number, as a name, as a man. Janelle watched from her kitchen window as Michael walked home one night. No camera crews, no speeches, just the sound of his key turning in the lock. He looked lighter, still heavy with memory, but grounded. She'd spent years fighting for his life. Now, she was watching him live it. As he stepped through the door, he smiled, something small but real. "Long day?" she asked. He nodded. "Good one." That was enough. They didn't talk much that night. Just moved in silence. She washed the dishes. He made tea. There was peace in that quiet. Not victory, but peace. Sometimes, survival isn't about standing tall. Sometimes it's just about standing at all. Michael stood once more at the courthouse steps. But this time the cameras returned. Another trial. Another name. A boy on the inside. A city watching again. Michael didn't speak into microphones. He spoke to the lens, direct. His voice steady. Justice isn't blind, it's just expensive. No anger. Just truth. The image froze on his face. Then the camera pulled back. A gavel slammed. A door shut. Somewhere, a boy waited for someone to fight. Michael turned, walked down the steps. Not a hero. Not a martyr. Just a man who knew what it meant to be forgotten, and refused to forget anyone else. The world kept spinning. But now, it couldn't pretend not to see.